Hey there, everyone. Just getting my audio set up and making sure everything's good. Just give it a second. I won't wait too much longer for everyone. But we're early. We're early. 3 minutes early. I'm going to go see if things are working on Twitter the way they're supposed to. I'm supposed to be simulcasting this on Twitter too. We'll see. Thanks for your patience. This is the little homestead that I've started in Vermont on the Canadian border, so I can run a tax strategy. Usually you'd see a lot more mountains, but it is a gray day. It is quite gray. The Twitter thing doesn't seem to be happening, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. I wonder. Yeah, hey Huru. Gonna be every morning. Thanks for tuning in. Here's the view. This is what's taken so long. It's all this business. I had to do a bit of this stuff before I could get back to the show. But we're going to see lots of beautiful sunrises from here. And it's a beautiful day, isn't it? Even though it's kind of rainy, even though there's a lot of mischief going on in the world. You see that. All right, we're going to get going. Okay. Well, we're back. Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming. We're going to be broadcasting these every morning at 8 a.m. exactly. So join us for coffee and really to pour over the news and not get so stressed about what's happening in the world. There's all kinds of stressful things, and this shows to realize that we're at the dawn of a golden age. Really, the dawn of a golden age, the dawn of a Bitcoin era. So sometimes, Mark Twain said this once, that humans can't tell the difference between good news and bad. And I think that's really what's going on here. We really can't at times tell the difference between good news and bad. It all kind of looks the same. So you got a lot of people talking today about, well, Europe's going to freeze and there's a huge recession coming. That all looks kind of accurate. But if you stop for a minute and ask what is actually breaking simultaneously and what we'll have to rebuild and potentially get it better, then you can start to see that it is the dawn before a great day, right? Just like today, we're having a nice dawn here. We're waking up and talking about all this fun stuff. And when I see the sun rising like this and Bitcoin is still running, it makes me thankful to Satoshi, because otherwise I don't know what I would be doing right now. I would probably be jacked and stressed out about all this stuff and wouldn't really have a vision for what's going on, what's going to happen next. And people who think that policies can really inspire people to, or limit them, policies can either inspire them or limit them to building a better future. You'd only take a look at what's going on in China really quickly before we get into the stories today about Italy and all this stuff. But just take a look at China for a second. we see China's got a massive demographic problem, right? Massive. Like they're going to get old before they got really rich, and they're going to be as old as rich countries like Japan. And what are they going to do? And of course, everyone stops and says, "Well, they did it to themselves. The one-child policy, right? Geez, that one-child policy." And now they're trying to have programs to provoke and get more kids out of the country, and it's not working, and the policies aren't going anywhere. So everyone thinks, one child, it's obviously one child. I mean, clearly it had an effect. One child was a horrendous policy of amplitude that I think we'll never see again in this century. It was an incredible thing. But what effect did it actually have? Did you know that Taiwan has a lower birth rate than China? Taiwan has a lower birth rate than China. Lower. There's no policy there that stopped them from having kids or anything. Taiwan, similar country, similar people, right? China, Chinese people, right? Have a lower birth rate than the country that had the one child policy. So what does that tell you? Well, we see rich countries not wanting to have children. That's a big part of it. Rich urban countries often have a really quickly declining birth rate because the cost of kids and all that. But abstract the cost of kids for a second. It often has to do with prospects of the future, like how well you can imagine. That's not a policy necessarily. It's a collection of policies, but it's not a policy. China has tons of policies that say future is great, we're going to have a great time. Meanwhile, the people in the country have adopted two slogans. Whenever people tell me, oh, China this and China's coming, and now they've tricked out TikTok so they can only do math in the day and it's only engineering. Do you know what the young people in China are living by? They have slogans that are able to penetrate WeChat. They get censored very quickly, but the two main slogans today, and they've evolved. The first one was lie flat, right? They called it lie flat, which is don't do anything. Just let this thing be. The next one they've adopted to mutate lie flat is one of the most horrendous things you could hear young people saying. I mean, imagine young people in your country thought like this. Let it rot. Right? It went from lie flat to let it rot. Let it rot. I don't know if these guys are really going to be creating a future to compete with what Bitcoin is creating and with all these entrepreneurial people. Now, Chinese people are going to be heavily involved in this future. But the policies of the CBDC, I think, are going to lead them to be abandoned and a relic of the past, right? Now let's get into the news today. The first thing I want to mention is, I'm really happy. I'm so happy for corporate media. It's just great. Great news. They had to compare everything to Hitler for the longest time. And that becomes hard, right? If you're always having to compare things to Hitler, you're a writer, you want to mix it up, you want to have a new opportunity and write creatively, right? I come on this show every day and I try to be creative and help you get your day started and not worry about this stuff and see a future with Bitcoin very clearly. But what's going on with the corporate press is they don't have, it's hard for them to come up with this creativity because the guidelines were, Hitler. But luckily, Italy has chosen a new leader, and it looks perfect because you can compare her to Mussolini very easily, right? There's no difficulty in comparing her to Mussolini. So, I mean, the corporate press just had like half their work done. Like things got half as hard. Things are twice as easy now for the corporate press. They have this whole other name they can compare this to. Michael Malice pointed this out. He was like, wow, finally, this is great. The corporate press really gets to add new letters, new words. It's wonderful. If you don't follow Michael Malice, I think all Bitcoiners should, because Michael Malice is probably the most clear thinking anarchists in the world. Now, if anarchy still gives you kind of an uneasy feeling, you don't know what it means, you think it means burning things down everywhere and just grabbing candy off of weak people and taking all their stuff and all that, the real chaotic anarchy of brutalism and largest people wins and all that stuff, then you need to follow Michael Malice, because Michael Malice is one of the great white pillars. He white pills people. We talk about orange pilling. I don't like the whole pill thing. It's a little too sexual, frankly. So I know it comes in the Matrix, the yellow pill or red pill, blue pill, all the pills. I prefer I like using it. Don't worry. I'm not trying to fight against it, but I find it a little vulgar and don't like to say I orange pill people. That seems like I snuck it in there. I like to think of it as, I had a nice conversation about Bitcoin and made you think about something. But anyway, he called it white pilling. And white pilling is basically just this idea that you can spread the themes of anarchism in a more beneficial way, in a way that won't lead to some resistance and suspicion on the part of listeners. So it's really a great thing. So Michael Malice reminds us all with this silly thing and in general that he's never been more enthusiastic about the future because there is so much division in politics, because it's so divided and everyone's fighting and pushing themselves to the extremes and saying the craziest stuff these days. I mean, it's almost impossible for the two sides in America, anyway, left and right, to have a coherent conversation. They're just throwing talking points at each other. They get hopped up on, let's call them talking points, right? You get talking points injected into you. I tend to not watch Wire, even though I love those guys and think they're wonderful. I don't watch it because they're too strong at persuading. If I watch the show, I almost adopt their points of view and I get angry about what they're angry about and I think what they're thinking because they're so good at their jobs, right? Now, I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I appreciate them a great deal. I think the world needs things like the Daily Wire and these really coherent networks out there that are not part of a corporate media structure. Really clever Jeremy Boring, the CEO and leader of the Daily Wire. I think he's one of the funniest guys in the world, one of the best media business minds out there. And his commercial on Jeremy's Razors, where he calls himself the God King, if you haven't seen it, it's honestly the best, one of the best commercials in the world. I really love it. So these guys, they'll jack you, right? They'll jack you, and that's kind of what's going on all over the place. People getting jacked and yelling. So Michael Malice believes that this is actually a great thing because it allows all the room that we require in order to make our points and push forward. And I totally agree with him. And a great example is, he's got a real he doesn't like Ted Cruz. It looks like. And he picks on Ted Cruz quite a bit. Now, I know Ted Cruz has made very coherent arguments to Bitcoiners, and I appreciate him for that. So I think as far as just persuasion goes, Ted Cruz is a powerful entity. He makes really logical, coherent arguments, and his arguments for Bitcoin were wonderful. Did they persuade anyone? I don't think so. Because, as Michael Malice points out, Ted Cruz has kind of already capped his audience in a way, right? He's just speaking to that captive group, filling them with talking points. And sometimes it's pretty funny when that doesn't go very well. He was at a college the other day talking about FBI and all this kind of stuff. And his answer was, and the school shootings and this and that. His answer to the troubles at this college was more police. So he says to the university, we need more police, right? And that didn't go over. It was a mix of booze and this and that. And that's really right there our opportunity, right? Some of these guys don't really see the other side and don't really know how to persuade. They're so used to talking to their side. And this Italy thing, this Italy election, I think underlines that opportunity for us right now. If anyone saw this new Italian leader speak, I mean, I hadn't really followed it much because Italy seems to change leaders pretty regularly, and I don't pay too much attention. I guess they had a comedian a little while ago. I thought that could have worked out. I thought it could have worked out there a few times, and it hasn't. The first anarchist I ever met was Italian. I was a political science student in France, and I met a real anarchist there, and I was like, what is this? What are you talking about? I didn't even know these people exist. He said, yeah, I'm an anarchist. You said a cat, yeah, I'm an anarchist. And it sort of led a lifelong interest in the subject from then on. And so the Italians changed it up a lot. They've been changing leaders. Of course, they could, like I mentioned earlier, the Mussolini thing doesn't look like she has anything to do with these sorts of things. She is a moderate reformer, it looks like. Of course, it's the extreme reaction because she's a populist and this and that. So she's crazy, she's this, she's that. What I thought was interesting is, first of all, I don't think I've ever seen a better persuader out of Europe. She looks better than anyone I've seen in America, including Donald Trump. Donald Trump is very similar to Ted Cruz, where he's really talking to a captive audience already. He's trying to prime the group he's already got there, which is good enough. If he gets them all primed, he can win. So it's not a strategy of enlarging the tent, even though it did, because they were just, the Trump's approach just was a little bit larger than the original GOP, but it's still so off-putting, right? It's so off-putting to many people. He could choose words that would be welcoming to a larger audience, but he knows what works, activating his base and mobilizing them to get them to do what he needs, which is fair game. He's very, very good at it. What I saw from her was someone who could really speak over these two solitudes, over these two extremes, and that was really pleasant to hear. She had one of the best contrasts I've seen in a long time between what people are fighting against, being a number, being another, labor, basically, just being another input, output of labor. And she said, no, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. She just wants to be herself. And I think that's something that almost anyone can relate to. Even if you're a right-wing or left-wing person, self-described right-wing or left-wing person, I think everyone agrees with that. I'm not one of these people who thinks that everyone on the left is a crazy communist trying to suppress what you have to say. I think a lot of them are embarrassed about what's going on right now with how some of these institutions treat others, if they're able to get away from corporate media and the talking points and the brainwashing and the hypnosis, right? If they're able to get away from the hypnosis. So the Italian prime minister speaks over these lines and I think put it in a way that most people can relate to, really powerful stuff. But Bitcoiners, I think, have an opportunity with her. So still a statist, definitely into the EU, all kinds of things that might be red flags. Who knows? I don't know much about her other than what I saw from a couple. Maybe it was a good day I saw her on. Maybe she's not that persuasive, but what I saw was next level. Like this is a revolutionary type communicator. And when I heard her speak about being a number, being the perfect consumer, she said, right? That was really, I think, the part that made everyone feel a little embarrassed. Being a perfect consumer versus being sort of the better angel of your nature. I think that's what we're all trying to be, but all of a sudden you realize you're just a consumer, the way she put it. And it makes me think that Bitcoiners do have an opportunity with her, and I think we should focus on it with her, because the no KYC piece might find traction with her, because we see the institutions that she's up against, the most empowered EU institutions, revolve around banking and regulations around commercial activity, as far as I can tell. I'm not an EU expert, but from what I can tell, the banking piece and the commercial relations piece, immigration definitely a part of it, but banking and commercial relations, big part. And you saw just a few days ago, 2 days ago, I think, MICA, the market something crypto assets, the European new bill that will, homogenize crypto rules in Europe. They had a big symposium in Paris, and Jay Powell spoke over video about CBDCs, right, the central bank digital currencies, and the big fella from the European Bank. We don't fat shame on this show, right? We'll get to the board in a second. We're not big believers in free will on this show, so we don't fat shame even bankers. We don't fat shame them. The big guy. He was there with Lagarde, right, talking about CBDCs. And Lagarde had a few interesting comments. Let me get my notes out here. So Lagarde said that a new period of free banking might occur because of cryptocurrencies, right? And she says this may cause financial crises. Right? So she says this, right? So she comes out and says, and then the big fella says, but we will only give it to the people if they ask for it and if they want it. Kind of demonic, right? Like, You know how these really crazy people want you to ask for the punishment, right? They can't just give it to you, right? You have to ask for it, right? A little crazy stuff there. But here's the thing about Lagarde and what she said, right? So she says these CBDCs are needed, right? Because free banking could lead to a new crisis. All right, a new crisis. So, in other news this morning, England, the Bank of England, is going to perform kind of a cheat code on quantitative easing, where they're going to purchase their gilts. I guess the bank is going to provide support for unwanted gilt. They call it gilt, GILT. I didn't even know this word existed. Gilt. It's their debts. They call their debts. Governments call their debts gilts. What? Gilts. So they call them gilts. So here we have a situation where she's saying we need more banking control because government spending and more government control because financial crisis. Meanwhile, we have government spending, which is now requiring an intervention from a separate bank from her own. But we've seen the theme of this, right? So central bank buying the government's debt to keep it off the books. And the other part, when it comes to CBDCs being used by individuals, of course, it's the whole data sharing, right? So you had Jay Powell say, well, they'll have to be all about personal information being shared. We can't have anonymous CBDCs. Okay. So meanwhile, the big fella also, so these are three stories, right? So three things happening at once. The gilts from England, the CBDCs must have ID, and finally, the big fella says that they had practiced or tried a wholesale CBDC already between several countries. And China was involved, a couple other big countries. So they announced it at the Parisian thing, right? So Lagarde says we want CBDCs because crypto usage will lead to free banking. Okay. Then we have him, Augustus, say the wholesale banking between the banks themselves. We already tried it, it works. If people want it, we'll give it to them. Right? If people want it, we'll give it to them. So that's pretty interesting. Now, the final piece, I got a comment here. We'll have the privacy, but not. Yeah. Thanks. That's true. They said they'll have the privacy features, but are not anonymous. Okay, well, we'll wait to see. We'll wait to see. So put those pieces together, right? And we come to our board today. We have a board today. All right. This is one that I've kind of used before, but it really describes what the show's all about. So I wanted to do it again. And what we've got here are these, I call them psychological engines, right? It's the forces that help propel an economy forward. Now let's put those three things in perspective again that we heard from the CBDCs this week. So they want the central banks themselves or the commercial banks themselves to be able to settle using this system if they want it, right? And we've also got a central bank buying up the debt of a country. So when we first set up this reserve banking system, the opposite of free banking. So if you know what free banking is, it's just the banks can go bankrupt. It's all it is. It's the banks that can go bankrupt, right? It's not like I'm free to bank, right? No, that's not what it's called at all, right? Free banking is really just a bank doesn't have a backstop. It doesn't have someone holding its hand. A bank doesn't have someone holding its hand, right? That was the original framework into which fiat banking was created. A bank doesn't have a backstop. A bank, all right? What we're talking about here with Lagarde, with Powell, with what's going on with the gilts in England, we're talking about everything now having a backstop. That is the central bank, not just the banks having a backstop, like a lender of last resort, right? That's what it was supposed to be, lender of last resort. Now, it's the everything of last resort, right? It's the everything. So it's the banks, it's, in this case, the actual government, the entire government, right, needs to get some of this debt off of its books. So the Central Bank of England is going to buy it from them. They're just going to create a demand for it. They're basically a babysitter of the government. Right? They're basically a babysitter of the government at this point. They're buying the gilt. They're buying their gilt, right? Commercial relationships, same boat, right? If we're trading our information so that all these transactions can be monitored, well, right, that means there's always remediation. Now, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with a system, taxation or commercial system that, that works in that way. However, people are uncomfortable when they can't cheat, right? They just are. You want the freedom to disagree, which is cheating, right? We all want the freedom to disagree. We have to. Otherwise, you have no negotiating power, right? Otherwise, the power of that system is just too strong. So what we have here in this psychological engine framework is we've got literally every piece, commercial, legal, government, administration, legal, commercial, and you have people just literally asking who's the boss, right? Who can help me figure this stuff out, because it's all coming down onto you, right? Literally all of it. The opposite, right? The opposite of that is what we're trying to cultivate here in Bitcoin. And luckily we get news like, right, just the other day, we'll get to that news in a second. In this system, the real contrast is, instead of asking who's the boss and what's going on and what I can do, with this bottom-up system, you actually start getting a framework to make decisions yourself, and you start asking what works, right? What works in administration? What works in commercial relationships? What works in legal relationships? And in the end, you start to have a better sense. Now, the problem with this model is that, and it's like the problem with anything, right? Nuclear energy, right? We've been on about I grew up as an optimist about everything, right? You grew up in the 80s and 90s, and you would have said, wow, like, what do we have to worry about? We've got nuclear energy and all these things. In the end, the propaganda or the messaging, or propaganda might be a strong word, but I know that's what we saw in Europe, for example, right? My old alma mater in France, Sciences Po, had a professor who has uncovered most of the green research that Greta would cite and all these people, right? All of this research was actually being funded by Russians over the years. So the anti-nuclear research was being funded by Russia over the years. So this is not, Sciences Po is not, it would be like a Harvard Kennedy Business School, Harvard Kennedy School of Government coming out and saying, this is what we saw. Russia had influenced over these years policy. And we're going to talk about it a lot on this show. Information laundering. You know how much it costs to launder information? It's been going on for about 150 years now. The Rockefellers were the best at it. Even the word fossil fuels. You know where that comes from? Fossil fuels? Oil doesn't come from rotten dinosaurs. Did you know that? It doesn't come from rotten dinosaurs. It's made up. There was a symposium in the 1800s on life, carbon-based life, right? Well, how do we define it? You know how all these scientists were getting together back then, and they were trying to figure out what is the definition of life. Is it carbon, water? I forget what the definition they came up with. But Rockefeller sent his envoys, scientists he paid for, to say, you're talking about life. Petrochemicals, hydrocarbons, are made of the same materials you guys are talking about and trying to define life. So these scientists proposed this idea that they came from dinosaur fossils. The reason is the early oil you could have got with a straw in America, just like the stuff in Saudi to this day. You just put it in the ground and it was like water. Right? So there's no price on this kind of stuff. There's no price on water. And they wanted to create a sense of scarcity, right? Now, illusion or not, this was a long time ago. It doesn't look like we're running out of oil. They told us that when I was a kid. I don't see it, right? I don't see this happening. But nevertheless, it could. I don't go around counting all the oil in the world. But what's been described is a system that deliberately laundered information, where they cleaned it up and then propagated it. So we're still under the impression that there's a fossil fuels, nothing to do with dinosaur bones. No connection at all, right? None. So just like with nuclear energy, it was really just a problem of public illusions. Right? Illusions are what have kept nuclear energy down, not engineers, In the 90s, we were an engineer away in every subject from living in a golden age. We were literally one engineer away. It was all an engineering problem. Right? Everything was just an engineering problem. It wasn't a will problem. It wasn't a motivation problem. It wasn't an incentive issue. It was literally we're an engineer away, or at least that was the perception. We were an engineer away from getting out of any trouble we might have had. Those public illusions around nuclear energy have propagated. Like, what do we do with the waste? You know, the nuclear waste has been solved for, I don't know, 20 years or something, right? You store it where you create it, right? You build these big chasms and there's no transport. They figured this out, and there's other reactors that don't even have as much of the trouble. So it's really just an education problem in the end, right? It's an education. The public illusions can persist because people are uneducated about many things, and I understand why. It's not their fault, right? There's all kinds of people trying to run them and push things into their head. But luckily, we've got some big wins in America recently, and that's Corey DeAngelis. So other news, I'll be working with Bitcoin Magazine to program the Miami show next spring. And one of the speakers that I really want to bring in from outside of the core Bitcoin universe is this Corey DeAngelis. He's a Bitcoiner. I've heard him interviewed on Bitcoin before during some bull runs. So he's, maybe a tourist. I don't know much about it. However, he is if you don't know who Corey DeAngelis is, he is the leading proponent of school choice in America, of breaking school unions, of breaking the monopoly the government has on education in many states. And he's had tremendous success, right? He's been going around decertifying states from the national union, teachers union point of view. Now, look, I got nothing against teachers. I have a problem with a union that's there for the teachers and not the students when we have a crisis of education, right? A crisis of education. We're really in trouble. If we can't tell the difference between nuclear energy good and wind energy not so good, we got major problems, right? And I don't even know if nuclear energy is the answer. I also lack some education. I always hear Elon Musk saying we can do it all with solar. Maybe he's right. I don't think his math is wrong. I'd say he's somewhat in the bag for solar, but he might just be right. I think he's rich enough. I mean, I don't think he's out to get an extra buck. He could be wrong, right? He could be wrong. But when I hear him say solar can do it, I listen, right? He knows more about it than I do. But anyway, I've had this idea of nuclear power since the 90s being our answer, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And the only way to get there, I think, is education, right? And nuclear power has the exact same problem, or Bitcoin has the exact same problems as nuclear energy, the exact same problems. It's an illusion problem, public illusions, and these public illusions can break really quickly. And Corey DeAngelis is on his way to do it. Corey DeAngelis recently, this is a great story, by the way. Recently, he got full school choice in Arizona. What full school choice means is this. Say per head, per student, a family would get about $20,000. I'm making numbers up, right? But say your state budget divided by students, whole budget divided by students, they would be paying $20,000, let's say, per head, right? So in this case, the $20,000 is given to the individual to shop around. So the portability piece in Arizona, I think, became the highest in the union, I believe. They had the most portability. I think there's other ones out there, but this gave a lot of choice. And this woman tried to run a referendum to claw that back. She was from the teachers union. She tried to run a referendum to claw it back. And she was promoting, we have all these signatures, we got this petition, and we're going to get it pulled back. Turns out she was lying. She had nowhere near the numbers. When they actually counted them, when they actually audited the election in Arizona, they audited an election in Arizona and came up with totally different numbers than the people were reporting at first. So she got wiped out and lost by a mile. And Corey DeAngelis managed to take the day. So wouldn't you know that auditable elections are a good thing? Auditable elections are a very good thing, especially in Arizona. Now, there's other things that will help us move further along on this road, right? That go beyond just perceptions and illusions. If we have our engines here, and we see the motivation of the FBI, right? Forget about the elections for a second. Another thing about the FBI, they just robbed a bank. Have you guys seen this story? I'm going to start putting these in. Never mind. Ooh, audio glitches. Okay. So far, so good. I could put these up and see if now that one's not going to work very well. So FBI apparently went into a bank with fake warrants, right? So it's totally fake. They went into a bank with fake warrants and took out $86 million from innocent Americans. They drilled into the boxes and all of this stuff. So, this public perception, we've got the education now nowhere near as respected as it once was in America, all kinds of pieces falling through. We've got now the legal system that is just in total disrepute. Total disrepute. Administration and government, wow. The politics of myself and what I hope to propagate on this show is that, we loved Trump as a Bitcoiner. He was the best, right? Because he instilled a certain unease in the situation, a lack of confidence in the situation. So we loved Trump, right? We loved him. But the new guy, the one who has trouble speaking, is much better, right? I love him way more as a Bitcoiner, way more. He's the best. I think Joe Biden is the best president Bitcoiners could have asked for. There's no one better. He's just a symbol. He's perfect. He's perfect. Like when he can't think of things and he loses his train of thought and he looks, every time he's on stage, doesn't know where to go, right? And then you get the FBI acting in this way. It's perfect. Literally perfect. We couldn't ask for better. And now they're robbing Americans. Whew, it's just, it's Christmas. It's Christmas. So we got school choice gathering steam in America. We've got Italy. Oh, and the other piece on Italy that I want to mention, it's a thing where we've got this opportunity around KYC. I think in her case, but she's not really the reformer. We think anyway, to go hard, right? To really change things. And when I see in America confidence being lost and Powell making these comments about the CBDC, everyone's going to have to, give up their information. It really makes me think of an opportunity that Bitcoiners have in America in particular. And it's this, we created the government as it is. And the bureaucracy, the administration, everything to win World War II. It was like a great battleship World War II, right? It was full of those civic engagement people, we're going to get it done, and everyone, motivated and working for one goal. A little bit like what things are at Bitcoin Magazine around the shows and content, right? Everyone sort of gets together and really wants Bitcoin to proliferate. Maybe not their own egos or their own accomplishments. That's sort of secondary. It's get the job done. And you do find this in a lot of communities, especially in the early days. Everyone's aligned, everyone's pulling in the same direction. But of course, rot, entropy all seep into the system. And so when I see these CBDCs, I continue to think our opportunity is the following. Basically, everyone who wants to live within this system, right, maybe they can. If we make a trade, right? It's like Indiana Jones when he's trying to rob that thing, and got away the gold and the bag of sand, right? My idea would be to basically say we created this whole government win World War II, and it cost this much money, but it's useless now. It's FBI and all these things. Why don't we tell them all to stay home, take all that money that goes to their buildings, their heating, their supplies, pencils, gas in their cars, plane tickets, junkets, all this stuff, right? And I'm not just talking about the FBI. Almost every federal institution that was created out of World War II in the years following when we thought these big bureaucracies were the way to go. Take all that money, just like the charter school thing, put it all away. And anybody who wants to go and, stay in that system, share all their information, have decisions made for them, they can literally trade the government for a UBI check for every individual. See what I mean? See what I'm trying to do here? You're taking the whole budget, right? You're taking the whole budget for the government, all that money, dividing it by people who want a cut of it. Could be you. You could be a Bitcoiner and you could want it. You'd have to share your information, all this stuff, but you could do it, right? And then everybody gets a check. And we have no more government. We still have an elected government. We still have an elected government, right? We'd still elect politicians, but that would be the end of it. It would be like the old days, right? There's just the government that you elect. That's it. There's no one else. They can't pass the buck to this department. They can't say, well, I'm going to send it to, none of that anymore. None of that. They got to live with their record, with their abilities. Maybe this will increase the talent level because they're pretty low IQ at this moment, right? Most of the congressmen and senators. I mean, but it doesn't even matter right now. IQ, it doesn't even matter. You look at this Pennsylvania Senate election. It's hilarious. Imagine being Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is running against this guy Fetterman. He had a couple strokes. He can't talk. Yesterday he said the Eagles are better than the Eagles, and he's gonna win. He's tied in the polls or whatever. So imagine you're Dr. Oz. You're sitting there saying, "Wow, I wanted to get involved in politics, and it was a good idea, and this and that," and you're losing to a guy who can't speak. And Trump, must think the same, right? He must think the same. This other guy that can't speak. So there you go. We got to trade that money, and maybe we'll get a smarter government out of it, right? I think we will. Speaking of smarter government, I'm going to do this one for you guys because I worry about you getting jacked. I have two pictures here that I want to share today. This is a new special effects feature, but it's unproven yet whether it works. It doesn't really work, I guess. I'm going to have to try it out. So I'll come closer to you. You guys know this one, huh? I identify as hyperinflation. I'm bringing this up because be careful. I'm a Canadian. This is a scam. This is a prank, right? This guy is pranking people. It's one of the greatest pranks I've ever heard of. But this is, I believe, I have no knowledge of the situation. I've never met this person. They live far from me in Canada. I'm not even in Canada at the moment, but just my sense. I've heard on 4chan, someone told me that on 4chan, his students have reported that he is anti-woke. So just continue to not get triggered by this fella and this lady, and let it all unfold, because I think we're going to see something hilarious, right? We make a lot of predictions in the show. We'll tell you when we're wrong. We have to predict. That's one of the reasons why I do the show, right? I do the show to help you get, through the sunrise of this crazy change and through the day and without getting jacked by someone's fear-mongering. But don't get jacked by the absurdity of these super tits. Because it's not real. It's fake. That's my pretension, right? I'm telling you this is a scam, and in a fun scam. It's a prank, right? Probably a political prank. It's not an innocent prank. I think they're trying to persuade and motivate, which is fine. But just don't get angry about it. That's what I hope you can get out of this show in general. Don't get angry. Don't get insulted by this person. This might be one of the greatest pranksters you've ever seen in your life. Just wonderful stuff. The last story I have today is because, look, we are, we're at the cusp of a golden age here, guys. We're at the cusp of a Bitcoin-induced golden age. And while there's going to be a lot of fun stuff, this is actually happening. This is flying cars. It's a real flying car. Japanese people made it. It flies. It looks like a motorcycle. They're here. So just like, we've been talking about flying cars forever, right? We've been talking about unlimited energy. We've been talking about a utopia forever, right? Since World War II ended, we were going to produce it. And there will be flying cars in the utopia. Well, the flying cars are on schedule. All we got to do now is get rid of everything else that we did to win World War II and replace it with a Bitcoin standard. And we're going to be just fine. So that's it for the first episode of our new season of the Breakup. We went a little longer than we thought, but that's fine. We've got more shows coming. We're going to be here every day. So get your fill, tell your friends, let's grow the audience, like and subscribe, do all the fun things that I need, and we're going to help everyone get to the next level. Thanks, team. See you next time. And thanks to guys for showing up live. This has been really great. I mean, honestly, that's why I'm doing it. I really appreciate everyone who came live today. You guys mean a lot, and hopefully I can help you. Ciao.